Welcome to Lawyers Who Care, the video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. And on each episode, we'll meet a new lawyer and they will share stories of when they went beyond legal counsel for the benefit of their client. My name is Andrew Samalin. I'm the principal of Samalin Wealth, a nationally recognized wealth management firm for lawyers, their firms, and their clients. And let's applaud Lawyers Who Care and learn from them. Today, my guest is Summer McKeivier. She is a shareholder and senior attorney with Chapman Law Group, a firm that specializes in representing healthcare practitioners. And Summer represents clients nationwide from California to New York in the areas of federal criminal defense, healthcare fraud and abuse, government investigations, DEA matters, and more. Welcome, Summer.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
So, Summer, tell us about your firm. How did you come to the law back in the day?
Well, I originally started at a nationwide criminal defense firm, which we specialized in federal criminal defense, and it was general criminal defense, meaning I did everything. I then transitioned and interviewed and joined Chapman Law Group. Their focus primarily is on white-collar criminal defense. Mainly, we represent healthcare providers who've been accused of violations of the Controlled Substance Act or healthcare fraud. So I lead the team, the white-collar team, in those kinds of investigations and defenses. So basically, if a doctor's being prosecuted, then we defend them.
Gotcha. And what brought you to the law in the first place?
Well, I thought I was going to go into medicine, which is interesting that I'm in healthcare law, because I thought once I decided not to, that I would not have anything to do with healthcare. But I got my undergraduate from Louisiana State University, and I was doing all of the work in the local hospitals to become a doctor. And during that process, I worked a lot of overnight shifts in the emergency room and in the ICUs. And I saw a lot of things that I found I might have been a little too sensitive to do on a daily basis. At the end of my college, I had to break it to my father that I was no longer going to be using that degree to go to medical school. So I needed a fallback. I met a lawyer in New Orleans, and she was telling me about what she did. And she was an entertainment lawyer in New York. And I thought, great, I'm going to be an entertainment lawyer. So I went to law school. I went to one that specialized in entertainment law in California, and I graduated. I found out I was interested in criminal law when I was in law school, graduated, did entertainment law for about 3 years, and then realized I'm not really doing anything with this education and this debt that I have. I'd rather do something more meaningful than contracts about movies and television shows. Mm-hmm. So I just on a whim sent my resume to a criminal defense firm, joined it, learned everything I needed to know, or I assume, well, you never know everything, learn everything you need to know, but learned a lot along the way. And then from there, it just progressed. And it led me back to healthcare, strangely.
Right. There seems to be a gravitational pull that, you can't seem to escape. Question. So in your line of work, there's certain client stories that come up. In trust in the States, there's really not that many great stories. In your specialty, I'm sure there are. Is there something you want to share with us?
Sure. I'll even tell you that right now I'm rushing back from a hearing that I just actually completed where, I still get emotional. I had a very young girl who has a 2-year-old daughter who just got sentenced on a fraud case. And I found myself almost tearing up and making the argument to try. The government was asking for quite a bit of time, almost 10 years. And luckily the court listened and really took into consideration all the factors and gave her 5 years. I know that's not nothing, but today that was a huge win. But, being in this line of work, you get a lot of stories because, I'm a defense attorney and people are always like, oh, you defend people who've committed crimes. I guess my response is I defend people who've been accused of committing crimes, and in a lot of cases they have done so. And everyone always wants to know, how can you do that? And you really find the humanity in everyone. It doesn't matter what they did. You find humanity, and you find that they weren't bad, or they're not bad people. Maybe something happened along the way or something kind of pushed them towards that, which kind of dovetails into the story I was going to tell you today. I was contacted by the family of a gentleman who had been a former drug addict and who had left California and moved to Oklahoma over 10 years before, and he had opened up his own business. He was very successful. He was doing really great. He was the single father to a young boy. He had been since he was born. But COVID hit, and idle hands are the devil's playthings. Some people from his past back in California reached out to him, and somehow or another, he started accepting shipments of controlled substances, the ones that you can't. Not a doctor in this case, so he's not allowed to deal with controlled substances at all. The government was pretty deep into this. Actually, I think it was the state that started it, but it was a pretty in-depth investigation with T3, like wiretaps and stuff like that. So they really had everything. It was actually being run by a gentleman out of one of the prisons. He was a gang member who was actually incarcerated at the time he was running this big drug ring. But my client had a past with him. They were friends growing up, played baseball together, and one thing leads to another, and he's back involved. They very quickly realized he was involved, and he was kind of the low-hanging fruit at the time, I think. And DEA swoops in, ATF DEA swoops in, and they arrest him. And, we start the process. He was very lucky. He did everything he needed to do really quickly up front. One of the things about a controlled substance violation, particularly if there's any weapons around, in this case there were, only because he was a gun enthusiast, this was not related to the actual commission of the offense. But, you can't have drugs and guns near each other. That's just a rule I tell everybody, whether or not you're using them in connection or not, don't have them near each other. So they swooped in, and we were very lucky because there's a mandatory minimum with those kinds of drugs. Like, you could start off at 10 years, and if you have a weapon, you can add 5, 7, or 10 more on top of it. So really, depending on how you use the weapon, you could be looking at a maximum of 20 years before you even start, right? So in his case, it was a lot of back and forth with the government and a lot of hoops we had to jump through, but we managed to only get him to have to plead to the weapon, not the drugs. So he really got a very favorable sentence from the jump. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 6 years, which is not bad because you're starting off right now. You're really starting off right there at a mandatory, 7 for the gun, and we haven't added the drugs, but he was very lucky.
Quick break. If you're a healthcare provider or an entrepreneur involved in healthcare and have a legal problem, whether it's compliance, regulatory, DEA, criminal, or any number of legal problems, Chapman Law Group is here to help. Please visit us at chapmanlawgroup.com. Click the link below. Now back to the video.
And what was very noticeable in this case is that he had a son. The son was about 12 at the time. And he scheduled a phone call with me. Well, his dad was in jail waiting sentencing, and he actually contacted my office and wanted to schedule a phone call to talk to me. I've never talked to a child about this. I've certainly never been contacted by one, but I agreed to the call. I spoke to his grandparents, and I was like, where exactly where do we draw the line here? He's going to ask me questions about what this is about and how much we share and how much does he know? He was a very smart young man. He asked a lot of very intelligent questions. He was not pushy. He was not overly emotional in the fact he definitely wanted his dad back. This had been his only parent since he was about 6 months old. His mom was out of the picture, so it had just been those two for 12 years. Anyway, I really liked the kid, and then came time for sentencing, and he wrote a letter, and I explained everything I could. He really wanted his dad to be closer to him because he had to move back to California to live with his grandparents. He'd been living in Oklahoma, but he had to have someone take care of him. So he said, "Can you please get my dad in a prison near where I live so I can visit him?" I said, "I can try." For those who know, that's not really up to us. We can make a recommendation, but the Bureau of Prisons decides where people are going to go. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so fast forward to it's time for the sentencing, and the grandparents asked me, he really wants to come. Can he come? Should he come? Again, my response was, how much do you want him to know? He's going to hear a lot of things. But like I said, he was a very mature young man, and he came. And that was the first time I met him. Super cute kid. Shook my hand. He was impressive just all the way around. We did the sentencing, and the court actually addressed him specifically, asked him to stand up, and told him that his father, I'm getting emotional now, told him that his father had made a mistake and that this didn't define who he was, and all those good things. And, that people struggle with drugs and things like that. And they had done this really great thing for 10 years by being clean, and he would do it again. And, this was just going to be a blip on the radar, but, to still listen to his father, obey him, and, give him a little grace. Well, his father was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and he was sent to a terrible prison, nowhere near California. He was sent to Leavenworth, actually. And there were reasons behind that. There was some dangers of the other people who were going to be indicted, and still, there was danger there. You can't have those people in the same prisons. There was drugs. There was, some cartel connections, and you just have to be very careful because you don't want anybody to get hurt in prison. So anyway, he was toiling his time in Leavenworth, and he would occasionally drop me an email. We can communicate through email with him. But I would say it was about a year in, maybe a year and a half. It wasn't much. And I got a call from the grandparents, or a text, something like that. But it appeared that this young boy had, or was in the process of being diagnosed with leukemia. So now we've got dad in jail, only parent he's ever known. And he's living with grandparents who, they're of an age, they're retired. They don't, go into hospitals and doctors, but they were having to do a lot of that. He had gotten really sick, and they were waiting for the final word that they thought that was what it was going to be. And they asked me if I could get my client released, if I could ask the court to release him. And it was terrible because I knew I couldn't. I knew that, in my mind, I couldn't. I knew that compassionate release has some very, very narrow eligibility windows. And while the Supreme Court has now made it so that really it's up to the discretion of the judge, there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And the majority of people who can be released on compassionate release are elderly, they've served the majority of their sentence. They are, they're maybe terminally ill, or they were the only person who could go take care of a minor individual, or, and in this case, we didn't have any of that. My client was like in his 40s. He was not terminally ill. He had only served about, now at this point, because he had been in custody prior to sentencing, he had only served about two and a half years, really. So he hadn't served anywhere near the majority of his sentence. He wasn't the only caretaker. Clearly, the kid had grandparents. And I remember driving home that day after they asked me that, and I called my mom. And I was just so distraught. It hit me for days, actually, because I really didn't tell him that day that I thought I can't help him. I was like, let me look into it. But I knew in my heart, or in my mind, I knew that there was a very big hill to overcome. And it was happening so much during COVID, and they were just getting denied left and right. So ultimately, it took me a couple of months, but we put together a huge packet, and I begged the United States Attorney's Office, and I pointed out to the court that they remembered the kid. I was like, remember the kid? He stood up, wrote a letter. You know who he is. And ultimately, the court released him. So they have now, and they keep me up to date, but he has been struggling. But I think that he is now finally done the last surgery, which they believe is the one that will possibly knock the chemo out. But the good news is he doesn't go back. I mean, once you're out, you're out. He's kind of just so really turned it around, and now he's been with his son in and out of hospitals, but there for him at least, not doing any of the stuff he was, he got lackadaisical on and let his guard drop. But yeah, so he was released, and honestly, since then, I've even taken my son to visit the kid. They're the same age.
Yeah.
Started to play video games online together, stuff like that.
That's great. So, Summer, I think before we wrap up, if you could leave our listeners with just one takeaway after an extraordinary story, what would that be?
Well, as a lawyer, even though my gut knee-jerk reaction is that I'm going to do this, but we're going to fail, and then I'm going to have to break these people's hearts. Find a lawyer who's willing to do it and to dig deep and to research and to find every single little avenue they can to throw at the court, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because a lot of this came from what I presented to the court, but a lot of it came from the back door, kind of like, you remember him, you know who he is, you know what he's gone through. Don't make him go through this without his father. And, because I will tell you, that day I was defeated, absolutely defeated. It is the best outcome particularly recently. I mean, I've had some great outcomes in cases, but that was literally the one that's story worthy in my book.
Amen. Amen. A wonderful story. By the way, this is Summer McKeivier of Chapman Law Group. Summer, can you share your contact information with our audience?
Sure. You can find us at www.chapmanlawgroup.com. And my email is, as you can see my name on the screen. Well, you'll find me on the website and all the information's there. But my email address is S with my last name, McKeivier, McKeivier at chapmanlawgroup.com. Or you can call us at 248-644-6326. And we have offices. First of all, we do this nationwide, but we have offices all around the country in Detroit, Miami, and Los Angeles, California, Seattle, Washington. So we travel everywhere. Today I am in very cold Philadelphia.
By the way, thank you, Summer. This has been the Lawyers Who Care video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. And if you're an attorney or know one who goes above and beyond, feel free to reach out to us, 914-666-6600. Summer, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for a wonderful story.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe and hit that little bell down on the bottom to receive notifications of our upcoming videos.